Do you see where that is?
Mm-hmm. So, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Hope everybody is well rested and super excited for what will be a very heavy but also robust conversation looking at grief and loss among men. My name is David Miller. I am super excited to moderate the panel. I'm also going to be a moderator and a participant at the same time because growing up in West Baltimore, I experienced my fair share of grief, witnessing my best friend was shot and killed standing next to me. I was at Morgan State University. He was at Morehouse, as well as, the death of a parent, the death of a brother. And so when we talk about grief and loss, this conversation really hits home. Just a few housekeeping notes for the audience. Anybody who registered, you will be getting a copy of this broadcast. Kenny Braswell from Fathers Incorporated will do what he does. He'll edit, add music, add some bells and whistles that will be made available to you in the weeks to come. Want to definitely give a shout out to Fathers Incorporated. I've been a consultant with Fathers Incorporated for the past 15 years. It is an Atlanta-based organization, ladies and gentlemen, that is doing amazing work with fathers, both individual fathers in the city of Atlanta. I think Fathers Incorporated works with about 800 fathers in the community, in various communities throughout Metro Atlanta each year, as well as Fathers Incorporated manages the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse, which is the premier entity for research, policy briefs, webinars, videos, anything that uplifts and talks about responsible fatherhood. I'm also an inaugural fellow with the Moynihan Institute for Fatherhood Research and Policy. Moynihan is seriously committed to rolling out strengths-based research on Black fathers, and we just completed a major report, the dynamics of Black fathers in Atlanta, looking at the impact and the challenges that low-income fathers in Atlanta are faced with. I was one of the researchers assigned to that project. So those are two really super important organizations that you can check out, both Fathers Incorporated and the Moynihan Institute. Other housekeeping note, feel free to share questions. We will have a special period where we'll address Q&A, but if there are burning questions or comments that folks have, just jump right in and throw your question into the chat. And what we'll do, we'll try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. And so let me introduce our panel. We have a serious panel of folks who are ready to dive deep and who are ready to help me kind of guide this ship, with our overarching theme is really, ladies and gentlemen, around health and healing strategies for men, particularly around grief. What grief and loss. One of the things that I'm pretty clear about before I introduce our illustrious panel is I'm constantly annoyed when I hear people say that Black men are not interested in therapy or that Black men are not interested in mental health. I believe that Black men are interested in therapy and mental health strategies. I think there's an issue around community education and access. And so one of the things that we want to do this morning is really uplift, talk about the benefits of therapy. We have three amazing clinicians in the building who can answer any kinds of questions from soup to nuts. And so, as well as we have a brother who will be sharing his personal story and how grief and loss has really impacted his family. And so let me briefly introduce our panel, and I'm sure throughout this conversation, they will share aspects of their work and who they are both personally and professionally, because although we are all professionals, each of us has been impacted by grief throughout our lifespan. And so this will be a rich conversation where our panelists will also probably share some personal challenges that they've had. And so Dr. Janice Stevenson, who is someone who is very dear to me, I met her back in the day when I was in graduate school. She convinced me not to drop out. She is probably one of the most well-known psychologists on the Eastern Seaboard. She happens to be in the great state of Maryland. She has a tremendous, practice and a tremendous body of works. I want to say good morning to Dr. Stevenson.
Good morning, David. And I love you, so I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. We also have Dr. Lisa Good in the building. She is in the great state of New York, and she is a therapist doing some amazing work with a particular specialization around grief and loss. Lisa, good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. Glad to be here with you all today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce Brother Tracy Martin, who is a really serious brother. He is a father. He is critically committed to improving the lives of children, particularly Black boys. Many of you may be familiar with Tracy Martin's story. Tracy is the father of Trayvon Martin. Good morning, Brother Tracy.
Good morning, Brother David. How are you? Good morning, Dr. J and Dr. Lisa. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you guys on this joyous occasion.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Tracy. Our last panelist is he's literally walking across campus. All of us wear multiple hats. So Dr. Jeff Gardier, many of you know him as the hip hop psychologist. You've probably seen him on TV, Love and Hip Hop and other shows. He is literally, ladies and gentlemen, walking across campus. He had a teaching assignment this morning, so he will be joining us momentarily, and he'll fit right in. For those who are just joining, please feel free to fire away with questions. And so I'm going to start with Dr. Lisa. Dr. Lisa, why are we even having a webinar or a conversation about men with a specific emphasis around grief and loss? Why are we even talking about this?
We're talking about this because the grief of Black men in particular, the grief of men, period, but especially the grief of Black men is what I would consider disenfranchised, that it's ignored, it's invisible, and that often in times of loss, when you look at family dynamics and community dynamics, most of the attention is centered around women and how they're feeling and how they're doing and how they're navigating. And there's not necessarily intentional space made for the acknowledgement and the recognition of the grief of Black men. And nor is there any acknowledgement or recognition of the multiple types of losses that Black men experience throughout their development, starting from children into adolescence, into young adulthood, and into manhood. And so by the time men, are men, of a mature age over the course of their lifespan, they have accumulated a lot of loss, and it externalizes in a variety of ways, which often ends up being punished or criminalized and dismissed in other ways.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Stevenson, same question. I know you've been practicing, despite your youthful appearance, you've been practicing for a couple of decades. Why are we even having four decades? 4 decades. Why are we even having this conversation about men, grief, and loss?
Well, one important reason is because we're losing men to grief. Men act like they're not supposed to grieve and that they're busy being strong for the women and strong for the children, while suppressing and denying that their hearts are breaking too.
Mhm.
And so we're losing them to depression, we're losing them to drugs, we're losing them to suicide because they're so sad and they have nowhere to put it and don't know what to do with it and act like they're doing what they're supposed to do, which is be strong. Man, I'll give an acknowledgement right off the bat to Mr. Martin, because one of the things I remember most from the whole time when his son became a hero for the rest of us is that dad stood next to mom, mom talked, and dad had his arm around her doing his best to support her. But you couldn't, his face was so set, you couldn't see his pain unless you knew what you were looking at.
Mhm.
And some of us could see it.
Yeah, I mean, and that I think that that's a great, segue, Dr. J. So, Brother Martin, share with us. I can only imagine, man, but share with us what it was like, man, when you got the call and you found out that your son Trayvon had been killed.
It was just it's like the world stopped. You know, you don't, as a parent, you don't prepare yourself to bury. We don't prepare ourselves to bury our children. We try to live a life that allows our children to bury us, and so upon the initial initial information, finding out that he was taken away from us, my heart just stopped, man. It's no words that can explain it. And we, as fathers, we build bonds with our children, and we plant. For me, it was I planted this seed, and I nurtured this seed, and just to have this seed plucked from the garden, it tore me apart, man. And no matter how long of time has passed, you'll never get over it, man. It's just something that I know we have. We have different coping mechanisms that we put in place in order for us to get over it. But just the initial call, just the initial conversation with the detectives, you never get over that, man. You never get over that.
So,
David,
Brother Martin,
David, can I add something?
please. Okay.
Because one of the things that Tracy just spoke to are two things that occur frequently when the cause of death is violence, which is the trauma,
Mm-hmm.
the unexpected, shattering, life-changing trauma, and then the loss of the attachment to this space in your heart.
Yeah.
And those two frequently get ignored as occurring simultaneously. Yeah. And we have so much violence in our community, and we sometimes forget that the grief and the trauma are this. And he spoke to it.
Yeah. And so, Brother Tracy, talk about your other children and other siblings and nieces and nephews in the family. What was that process like, sharing with other children and other younger children and siblings in the family that Trayvon had been taken away? What talk us through what that was like as a family?
It was a process. One of the first things as a father, dealing with the grief of dealing with the loss of a child and explaining it to the rest of the children. You have to put it in. You have to kind of put it in perspective where they fully understand it. The first thing is, I think it was real important that we gave that I reassured the kids that over the course of time it'll be all right. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time for you to deal with this, to heal from this. But as your father, I'm going to be here every step of the way, and just trying to navigate through the public eyes what was going on, and trying to keep a level head with the rest of the kids. It was tough, but just I think the biggest part, the most gratifying part was just reassuring the kids that we're going to get through this together. I'm not going to let you do this by yourself. And, you know, and letting them know that there is help out there for you besides me. But as your support system, you know, I'll lead you in the right direction. And so and that process is actually still going with my daughter, because she's had ups and downs. She dealt with the loss of her brother. Then one of her friends committed suicide.
Wow.
And then her mom passed away. And so she's had a lot to deal with. And it's been an emotional roller coaster for her. And me just being there for her in every way I can, man, it means the world to her. And so by her expressing to me that, Daddy, I appreciate you for being here for me, that let me know that I've been guiding her in the right direction, and that we've been helping each other.
Wow. And so, you know, Dr. Lisa and Dr. Janice, I'll start with you, Dr. Lisa. In your clinical practice, what are you seeing in terms of some of the unhealthy ways that particularly Black men are managing grief and loss? What are some of the unhealthy things that you're seeing in your practice?
Definitely the overuse of substances. There's a lot of drinking and smoking and, you know, substance use, you know, to the degree that, you know, it can be classified as addiction. And, you know, it's so normalized that, you know, everyone does it, that in a lot of people's social networks, because everyone is doing it and they're doing it together, sometimes it's harder for them to identify that, you know, this is a coping mechanism or a tool that's not serving you well. It's numbing for right now, but it's basically putting the pain on layaway. The bill is going to come due. And many times, you know, there are other consequences that come, you know, with the substance use. The other thing that I've seen is just the, you know, and I think Dr. Jay touched on this, is just this depression and this not caring, right? So it also shows up in risk taking, like a recklessness, like what do I have to live for? What's the point? And there's this foreshortened sense of future. And so people have difficulty planning for the future and delaying you know, gratification. Um, and then, and when you combine that with some symptoms like, you know, with the trauma part of the loss, a lot of these men have post-traumatic stress disorder that has been undiagnosed. And so they're in a constant state of hyperarousal, hypervigilance, and high anxiety. And so the substances work to mitigate some of that. And you really can't pull unless you are able to address this over there. And then the last thing that I will mention is probably this hypersexuality, like, you know, and that's something that we don't necessarily connect with a trauma response in response, you know, when you look at especially violent losses. But a lot of hypersexual behavior kind of can unfold. And so those are, and then anger management, but, you know, but those are like in terms of behaviors and how people are typically coping. That's what I see. And that's really hard to get under when so many of their peers and it's just everywhere. And there's a lot of pressure, even when men want to pull away and say, I want to do something different. It's a lot of pressure for them to continue to cope and manage in that way, because that's what they see the other men around them doing.
And Dr. Stevenson, again, I know you have an extensive background in working with men. I know you've worked with men on death row. You've done a lot of work with men in the Maryland jails. And as as a psychologist, what are you seeing in terms of the kinds of unhealthy coping strategies that men are using to deal with grief and loss?
Well, I want to echo what Lisa was saying and extend it a little bit. For example, when I'm working with drug addicts, one question I will always ask is, what was going on the day before you took your first hit? Because that's the day. Yeah, I agree, Lisa. That's the day that they decided that their life had less value and their need to not feel pain had more value. Because it's rare that they don't understand the risk and dangers of drug use.
Yep.
But their hearts hurt so much. And frequently that drug use will start 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, because there's so much hurt already in place. And we act like that's not true. If I ask an addict, well, when did you decide that you wanted to die? Because every hit is a risk of an overdose or some kind of weird reaction to something you don't even know is in the substance. And you're willing to take it to stop feeling. But the other thing that I wanted to add is that people forget that grieving is healthy. It's the body's way, it's the heart's way of registering change and loss in your being. We have to figure out healthy how to navigate life without this person who we are attached to. Hi, Jeff. Welcome.
Hello. How are you? Good doctor.
And
Hello,
so being able to recognize that grief is healthy rarely occurs. People treat it like it's, I messed up and now I'm going to be depressed. Or this is going to kill me. I might as well kill myself first. Without ever paying attention to the fact that if I don't grieve, if I don't stop and figure out how do I navigate life with all that I acquired from the person who died. I have a couple of clients I'm working with right now where a parent died. And they're acting as if God personally is punishing them for being bad children along the way. Because if they weren't, God would let me have my mom or dad who I need so much. And these are important distortions in our thinking because we're making it our fault that someone died. I worked with a lady whose son was killed by DC police. And her perception is that she caused it because she didn't put the gun in his hand. She didn't send him out into the streets to be crazy. He learned that from his peers and he thought he was doing the right thing. And when he was dying, he said, I'm sorry. I love you. I'm sorry.
Dr. Janice, if you don't, can I chime in on that for a second?
Please.
And you said something very profound. I think that and my perspective, coming from my perspective is, as a parent, we do blame ourselves. And I blamed myself for a long time for the violent death of Trayvon. I blame myself in an aspect that I wasn't there at that particular moment to protect him from his assailant. And so for a long time, I carried that burden of just saying, if only I would have been right there at that particular moment to protect him, I could have prevented it. And
which isn't true. Please note that. It is not true. Everybody has a point when we die. Everyone.
Right.
This is not an eternal life.
Right. And it took me a couple of years to come to terms with that wasn't my fault. The altercation occurred and it just wasn't anything I can do to prevent that from happening at that particular time.
Just love him.
Definitely.
Just love him. And it's hard for people to really grasp that. I have a mom right now whose son died of an asthma attack. And she really wants to argue with me that I'm mistaken because actually her son is on academic voyage to Outer Mongolia, where they have no cell service. And so he can't stay in touch with her. And he'll be back any day now. And we start every session, literally for 5 years now, saying he's still dead.
Wow.
Because there's a chance he might not be.
Mm.
We
So
live like this life is immortal, and it's not. So we're in denial every day that life is real. It is what it is.
Yes.
Mm.
And when we realize that mortality has occurred, we change who we are. You know, like I've known Jeff a long time. We haven't been in contact with each other, but we used to do talk shows. We used to do the same talk shows. And every time I see him, I get real excited because that's my brother. You know, that's my brother. And when David said that he was going to be one of the panelists, my first thought was, oh, good, neither one of us are dead.
Mm.
Wow. That's deep. Yeah.
So
Right.
let me bring Dr. Jeff into the conversation. Dr. Jeff, thanks for your gracious time and your expertise to this critically important conversation. In your work, what are some of the unhealthy behaviors that you're seeing from men who are coping with grief and loss?
Well, a lot of what I've heard is absolutely true, that grieving is a very healthy thing. It's part of the process of dealing with death. And we all grieve in our own ways. And I think really what we tend to see with men in general is, and I know for Tracy, it's been a different route because of the type of man that he is. And I'm not making value judgments against my other brothers in any way, but knowing, that, this is a person who Tracy has always been a person, who is about his family, and I assume had a very healthy adjustment through life from what I can tell right now. But what we tend to see is sometimes there are unhealthy ways of grieving, and that may be being angry with whomever may have been involved with the person who is now dead, or being angry with oneself, as we know that in some ways that kind of guilt can be healthy for some period of time, but we have to begin to work through that and see it for what it is. But some of the unhealthier ways of coping, as we know, substance abuse, um, being physically involved with others in a very dishonorable way, that ends up hurting our spouses and those who are grieving with us. Um, Being in complete denial, as we've just heard from our good doctor, that this is, being in that denial for that kind of period of time. Initially, sure, that's a coping mechanism, but then being in denial as if nothing happened, and it doesn't have to be as extreme as we just heard. The room is pristine, this person is coming back at some point, but being in the denial that life moves on and now you have to redefine who you are. And for Black men in general, I'll just say that we really haven't been socialized to tap into a lot of our emotions and our feelings. And therefore, we tend to submerge those and repress those even further because we are much more concerned about surviving and getting through life, being strong, being able to deal with oppression. And therefore, we don't give ourselves the grace to be able to work through the grief and the sadness of being separated from someone. Notice I didn't say losing someone, because I believe that we are always with them in one way, some form or fashion.
Okay. So, do men and women grieve differently? And I'm gonna go to Dr. Lisa. Do men and women grieve differently? What are your thoughts? I'm just curious.
Well, Dr. Ken Doka talks about the differences in grieving styles with intuitive and instrumental grieving, with intuitive grieving being more emotion or feeling oriented and expressed in that way, and instrumental grieving being more task centered or task oriented. And so typically, when we think about um, uh, women, we give space, we make space, and we have even expectation that how they're going to deal with their grief is through the identification and the expression of their emotions, and it is socially acceptable to do so. um, Whereas men, you know they are doers, right? They're problem solvers, they're providers, they're protectors. And so how they may express their grief may come more in the form of doing. And so, I think that when you look at differences, some men have, they kind of move in between. But if you look in our community and you look at, like, I'm going to talk specifically as it relates to homicides and community violence because that's my lane. When I look at what the women are doing and what the men are doing, the men are at the memorials. Um, they're at the memorials. They're building the memorials. They're doing things. They're pouring libation at the memorials, right? They're sitting. They're gathering. They're doing things. And when I think of like, how they make meaning, they may make meaning through community events and community service, right? They're doing, it may look more doing and instrumental. And in terms of the family dynamics, when it comes to couples, sometimes in couples, you know, there's a disconnect because the woman may say, well, you're not feeling, why aren't you crying? Why aren't you expressing? But he is expressing. Maybe he's fixing that room. Maybe he's fixing the car, or that his child can no longer drive. Maybe he's coaching this team over here. And so it looks different, and we have to make room for that difference and be okay with that, as opposed to holding that in judgment. But it does look different, and also acknowledging that neither one is wrong. You're not wrong. This is how you're expressing it. But how dare you assume that because I'm not emoting, or I don't have the capacity, or because it's not been modeled for me, that that I'm not grieving. How dare you assume that? And so I think a lot of people make that assumption, and a lot of men live under the weight of that judgment and that assumption, which further positions them to suppress their grief.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Let me just, David, very quickly say, as I was listening to Dr. Janice and Dr. Lisa and Tracy, what I thought was, we grieve death the way we live our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Definitely. Definitely.
So, Dr. J, and then I'm gonna go to Tracy. What are your thoughts, Dr. J? Do men and women grieve differently?
I'm going to echo what Lisa said and extend it a little bit, because if you look at how we raise boys and girls, you can see the foundation laid for the differences there. If a girl is out playing and she bumps her knee and she starts to cry, then we rush over. Oh, baby, are you okay? Let me hold you. Let me comfort you. If the boy bumps his knee, boy, you better stop all that noise. You better get up and go out there and play. I ain't got time for all that foolishness. You need to stop all of that. So even as 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, we interact with them differently. Men are not allowed to hurt. And we act as if men are 100% logic and 100% strength. And they don't have a brain and a heart. And that heart doesn't hold love in it. My work has taught me, especially with the guys that I've worked with on death row, I'm really tired of men saying, no one's ever listened to me before. No one's ever been willing to just sit with me. Thank you, lady, for just listening and letting me talk.
Mhm.
And see, that means that the women that they dated, the women that they slept with, the women that they made babies with didn't listen.
Mhm.
And then the men don't often use the language. Like Lisa was saying, the men aren't necessarily socialized to be expressive unless they have an expressive father who accepts that he's sensitive and welcomes someone hearing him just like he's willing to listen to her. Sometimes we meet men that we love, and we love them because they understand me, they can hear me, but we
Mhm.
don't give them the same courtesy back.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to add to what Lisa was saying with that. But one other piece to this: the healthiest men we know are the men who are the most balanced. They treasure their intellect, they treasure their strength, and they nurture their hearts. And they stop women from berating them or judging them. They don't take in the messages from other men who say, "You being a punk now, come on, boy, be a man, stand up to it." They know that that message has nothing to do with them. Someone just said, if men are not allowed to hurt, how do we learn to get in touch with it or be in a space where people will listen? There are men out there who are willing to listen. The whole fatherhood movement is
Mhm.
men working with
Mhm.
men,
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
men have discovered that they can be nurtured and they can nurture. And so they nurture other men. There are mentoring programs like Big Boys, Big Brothers, and Big Sisters, where men who are willing to nurture take on where there's an absence of men. Kenny's book about spit and anger is a profound nurturing for men. I had him come speak to my clinicians at a clinic I was working in around about the time of the Freddie Gray riots in Baltimore. And when he left speaking to my clinicians about his book, he showed his video and talked about his book. Some of the therapists who were in the room, the men therapists, were in tears
Mhm.
because they
Mhm.
never thought about absent fathers, because they were big boys and they were going to be men. They were going to be the man of the house, and they could handle this, and they could take care of mama. They could take. No, they hurt too.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And those therapists now are different in how they work. These are men therapists,
Mhm.
black and white, are different now in how they work with male clients, boys or men.
And so, Dr. J, I remember when when Kenny shared the video, and somebody, Kenny, if you could put your website in the chat. People are asking how can they get the book. So Tracy, Brother Barton, let me ask you a different question, because I do think it's really important for us to really talk about fathers and how fathers grieve. What's the best advice you have received along this journey that you've been on? What's the best advice you received as a father who's grieving?
One word: vulnerability. You have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. That's the only way you're going. We look at it as, you know, how can we heal? As men, as fathers, we've allowed ourselves to put on our shield and not let it get cracked. Um, we're afraid. Too often we're afraid to expose the things that's hurting inside, and so we don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable to, opening up to therapists, doctors, or anything of that nature. And so we're continuing to keep everything bottled up inside. Um, it's our masculinity, it's our pride. We don't. I can't let you see me cry, because now you think there's a weak point. I have a different weak pointness in my life, and so for me, just being able to open up and talk to a pastor or talk to a therapist or whatever.
Mm.
It was tough at first because I just didn't want to let them inside to know what was going on. And eventually I started opening up and letting them understand, trying to get them to understand my hurt, is what I'm trying to get at.
Mhm.
We just, and that goes back to the mental health aspect. Is like in our communities, we think that mental health means that something's wrong with you, that you're crazy, you're getting a check for something, and it doesn't. Mental health, um, mental health ties in with um, our young men out here killing each other in the streets at the age of 13, 14, 15 years old. Those are mental health issues that we have to discuss in our communities, and we don't discuss them. And so just being able to open up and have a dialogue about what's hurting, um, what's damaging, what's being unhealthy in my life as I'm grieving, being able to open up to those different aspects, um, help me cope with a lot of different things in life. And that's just as I stated before, um, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable
Mhm.
and letting people understand us.
Mhm.
That's what helped me cope with a lot of things.
So before I go to Dr. Jeff, I want to thank you, Brother Martin, and you raise, I think, a critically important point. Y'all, we gotta get beyond this idea or this myth that we keep perpetrating, that men don't want to talk and that men don't want to be vulnerable. I think the critical question is, particularly for those who do this work, have we created an environment within our agencies that makes men feel physically and emotionally safe? When men feel physically and emotionally safe, they're more likely to open up. And so, Dr. Jeff, what advice would you give grieving fathers?
Well, let me answer it this way. Grieving fathers have to find um, folks like Dr. Janice
Hmm.
and people with the information like Dr. Lisa, and peer groups that are run by Brother Tracy. I think it's really important, and this is where the disconnect is. And Dr. Janice, you're waving your hand like I can't handle
I
anymore.
have
I don't know.
70 clients. I have 70
Well,
clients. 70.
but
That's
here's what
70
you do.
hours. Huh?
Okay, well, that's why you're still alive, and me too. But here, and you're doing it, and you're doing it in style, by the way. You're doing it in style. But here's the thing that's missing, right? And this is what Dr. Janice talked about, having Kenny come in and speak to the clinicians. The training around cultural sensitivity, cultural competence, multiculturalism, and working in communities, for example, with Black males, understanding the socio biocultural aspects, not just the psychology of who we are as Black men, but the environment in which we live in, the society in which we live in, and how that affects us, why we are socialized by society and our own families to have to be these really tough individuals. It's not because we feel that's the way it should be as a stereotype, but it's also about the protective covering, if you will, the adaptive powers that we want our Black males to have, but at the cost of their expressing their authenticity. So, as we train more and more clinicians, Black, white, Asian, LGBTQI, any intersection, we've got to train them in the nuances of what it is that Black men go through every day, what it is that they need, and understanding, as our colleagues have said, how they grieve, and how they grieve in a different way, and how many times the way they grieve is not wrong, but very different and adaptive to them. But we have to work with them to have more authenticity, to be able to come out and say how they feel, to be able to cry, to be able to fix the car, to be able to fix the room, and not be judged for any of those things. And that comes from the training. And that's the way we need to educate our clinicians. There's a movement afoot in this nation to take away training our students, teaching our students emotional intelligence, teaching our students Black history, teaching critical race theory. We are stripping the soul of our children, young Black children who grow up and become these individuals who now are stuck in one way of functioning. And so we have to undo that work as therapists, as researchers, as writers, as advocates, everything we represent on this panel with Kenny, doing Fathers Incorporated and writing as many books and on and on and on, the research that we do. Those things are very important.
Can I add to what Jeff is saying? Because I remember the day before Kenny and David wrote books. And I remember the discussions they had when they talked about they couldn't find books written by Black men for their Black children. And they made a decision to write 2 books a year. Remember? And now they each have an arsenal of books that they take around to schools and the community groups all over the country, but definitely up and down the East Coast, because 2 Black men decided to write books for children, period, so Black children could benefit from it. But there's another thing I want to pick up on what Jeff was saying. When segregation was throughout the planet, I'm 77, I'm old enough to remember that, okay? When segregation was rampant in the world, we managed our own communities. We took responsibility for what our children learned and what we taught them about who we are and how we survived and what our strengths are, so that it could not be taken away from us by a larger society that wanted to keep us in bondage. So it's blowing my mind to reach this. I was one of the people that went to white schools under police escort. And by the way, that's a loss in my life that it took me a long time to grieve. And now to watch people take the books out and all the stuff that we fought for, they think that's going to stop us being the power that we are. But we know our vulnerability, we know our strength, and we know how to stand on who we are. And so what Jeff is saying is real important. There's no reason why we can't take these conversations about grief into the pulpit or into churches or into religious organizations. We can't take it to the fraternities and the sororities where they're doing community work. There's no reason we can't take it into social, like the Links or other organizations that just service our community. Because we know our children. And we know that they need to be held and they need to be nurtured and they need to be heard and they need to be cared for. I don't want to go into another prison. I mean, somebody put on the chats that they work in the prison system in Maryland. Supermax and Maryland Penitentiary are my home. They're right down the street. And I was at Patuxent Institute about 2 weeks ago working with a guy. But the point we're making is that it's our children in those prisons, and they're grieving the loss of so much more than you could ever comprehend. A friend of mine over at Morgan is in the process of publishing a book called Redlining Childhood, the Survivonomics of America's Neglected Neighborhoods. It is profound when you read it, because it's not going to read like you think. Her name is Larice Edwards, Dr. Larice Edwards. She's in the public health department at Morgan. And how do I say this? I met her when we were doing treatment foster care together. So her whole life, like all the rest of us, has been committed in some way or another to working with our community and trying to improve it. And so one thing we can do to help people manage grief is remember who we are.
Yep.
And remember what we stand on. That, by the way, that was the message I gave to Dave, because he was in my class at Goucher. And he has to remember to honor his friend who was killed right in front of him by mastering himself so he can be the best that he can be. And every time I see him stepping out, I'll be like a proud mama. I ain't playing because that's my baby and he's doing good. And his friend would be proud of him. I know he would be. I'm going to be quiet for a while.
Wow.
I just wanted to add something to what Dr. Jeff said, just about the training part of it in terms of like the culturally responsive training. I think that clinicians and service providers also need to be structurally competent, where they have an awareness of the social determinants of health and how that impacts the men who show up in their services and in their practices, and not using the social determinants of health as some kind of abstract concept, but actually using that with the man in the center and looking at all of these different determinants of health, to include emotional and mental health, to say what factors are at work in this man's life, because then that helps to give context to the life, and it also hopefully will motivate and change how we serve, because how we need to be served is not in the books.
Mm-hmm.
What we do is meaningful and effective, but it's not in the books, right? We have high touch, right? We reach out, we're checking, we're doing all of the things because there has been so much loss in early on in the lives of so many of these young men, even as children, that it takes a different model and it's not in the books. And I think that when you have some awareness of not just being culturally responsive, but also being structurally competent, then, we can, again, hold that practice wise in a different kind of way, as opposed to the way traditional services hold it, which is you missed 3 appointments, so now you can't ever schedule us with us for a year, or you didn't comply with this, so now you're ineligible to receive receive the services. And the social determinants of health and understand being structurally competent helps you to understand and give context to maybe why and what's happening, for that person missing those appointments, for example.
Wow.
So, David, can I
please jump in?
Just want to jump in, and it goes back to something Dr. Janice was speaking on, segregation. What part of, at some point we have to realize that segregation plays a huge part in our mental space, our health, and our well-being. And I say that because along with segregation, there were a lot of different things that came along with that. And we're now starting to see some residual effects behind segregation. And a part of that is I'm a firm believer in, someone keeps putting in the chat about systemic racism. And so a part of that systemic racism to me is eliminating the father from the home. And so just knowing that society has created an atmosphere where if I allow a mother and her 4 children to stay in affordable housing for $8 a month without the father being present in that home, I can divide and conquer. And so to me, that's all a part of systemic racism.
Right.
I'm going to take the father out the home. I'm going to force this 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old child to become the man of the home. And by the time that child's 15 years old, he's in the system. He's in the prison system because he's been trying to take care of the household. And so is it a calculated plot? We can say, yeah. Some say yes, some say no. But that's just, some of the things that we don't discuss. And it is some of the things that we discuss with our men's group, trying to allow them to understand that, listen, this is how the system is built. This is what it was for. And that's why you find many fathers that are afraid to expose their hurt, expose their pain. And so I just wanted to add that to that part about segregation. A lot of things came with segregation.
Right.
Can I add to that a little bit?
Please.
I know I'm intrusive, and like I said, I'm gonna try and be quiet. But it was hard to resist this one, because we also act like there's not grief, like deep, profound, guttural grief, in what Brother Tracy is describing. For example, as a culture, we grieve separation from our home.
Mm-hmm.
And our history and our language and our traditions and everything. Then over here, we grieve loss of an identity. We grieve loss of respect and loss of integrity because we're treated as with the same value that the couch is treated.
Yeah.
And not that we stand as humans in side by side with other humans. It's not, we don't grow in a world where we are human beings working with other human beings.
Right.
We are viewed as one. When I forgot my doctorate, I was so many firsts that I got headaches behind it, which is ridiculous.
Right.
Because we've been getting educated since we were slaves.
Mm-hmm.
The only people that didn't know it was that majority. And now they're mad because we had the audacity to, we don't even mention Dr. Christopher Elsing now because that's my contemporary person. But we act like we weren't supposed to elect a Black man president. So now the whole country is grieving that we got a little power. Understand that this grieving is epidemic in the society. And then we have our boys and our daughters, our girls and our boys being killed because they had the nerve to stand and walk free. Now, I'm not trying to start no revolution. I want to start an evolution because we are going to grow whether anybody likes it or not. And now there are more minority than there are majority.
Yep.
And there's a grieving to that. The point I'm trying to make is a change, period, across the board, however it occurs, positive or negative, is a change. It's a loss. It's a shift. It's a difference. We grieve that. So when we walk around denying that we're grieving and we eliminate our men from being able to cry because they hurt, or we don't hold them because they need comfort like we need comfort, we act like we all don't have some little child in us who couldn't wait to crawl on the mama's lap because that was the safest place in the world. And how dare she die? Because where am I going to go for comfort? Who's going to comfort me? Because we don't trust and comfort each other. I meant what I said when I said, I'm glad to see Jeff because we're both still alive. Because every day is a blessing. It's a gift.
So let me do this. I just want to make share a couple of things, and then I want we got like 300 plus folk in queue. So folks begin to start curating, thinking about your questions. I know we're gonna need to do a part 2. I'm gonna ask the panel a question that I really think will be extremely beneficial. But I'm listening to y'all, and the first thing that comes to my mind is the work of Dr. Amos Wilson, where he talked about suicide on installment plan for Black men because of this overwhelming levels of grief and loss. I remember before the therapist that I have now, right? the therapist that I had before, when I had shared with my therapist all of the, guys that I knew and the things that I witnessed growing up, my therapist was overwhelmed. So I had to get rid of that person and get another one. But I'm also reminded of a quote by the prolific writer Ishmael Reed. Being a Black man in America is like being a spectator at your own lynching.
Wow.
Being a Black man in America is like being a spectator at your own lynching. The only reason why I share those two quotes, one by Ishmael Reed, another by Amos Wilson, is because somebody put in the chat, can Black men really heal in America? And I think that's a whole nother, y'all, we got to come back and do a part 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5. But one of the questions that I want to ask the panelists, because we got a lot of clinicians, we got a lot of folk that are doing deep end work in prisons. We got a lot of folks that are doing high end work with young people that are listening to this broadcast. And a lot of folks are burned out, right? I run a rites of passage program in Baltimore. We have 16 men who have been involved in this rigorous rites of passage process with us for the past 6 months. And a month and a half ago, the men shared with us that they are struggling mentally. And these are men that are doing amazing work in communities, but they've come to the point where they realize that they're overwhelmed. So my question for the panelists, can each of you share 3 things that you do to help you step away from the work? I mean, Dr. Stevenson, you have a caseload. You got 70 clients. That's overwhelming to me, 70, right? But Dr. Janice, Dr. Jeff, Dr. Lisa, Brother Tracy Martin, share with us just 3 things that you do that help you step away from the work, because many of us are burned out and overwhelmed. And I also think this notion of self-care, we talk about self-care in the abstract, but I think we need to be very concrete when we talk about self-care. And what I'll do is I'll start, because I see my good brother Daryl Green in the building. Check out his work, Deep Forgiveness. He's doing a major work. Daryl and I go fishing. Fishing saved my life, right? I'm usually on a fishing boat when it's warm once or twice a month. So fishing, writing children's books. And then the other thing is I go to Africa a lot. Being able to go to the continent has also helped save my life, because I got to get out of America. I don't know about anybody else, but for me, getting on a plane, I was just in South Africa a couple months ago. Getting out of this country for me is deeply therapeutic. And so we're going to go with Dr. Jeff. Just share 3 things that you do that help you put the work on the shelf so that you can take care of yourself.
Yeah, I believe that self-care is one of the most important things that we can do, especially if we are in the business and the mission and the spirituality of helping others. And maybe that's why Dr. Janice and I are still alive, because, we do some things. I have 3 things, maybe 4 or 5, but I'll make them very quick. Dr. Janice, you may not know, but since we last talked, I think I started with about maybe 3 children, and I'm up to 6 children now. I have a 31-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 22-year-old, a 21-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 7-year-old. I like to say I'm like the old man in the shoe. I have so many kids, I don't know what to do. So that time with the children, and Tracy, I say that especially to you because of what you've been through, brother. We all always think of you. We always think of you. We think of your family. We think of Trayvon's mom. We think about you guys all the time. I just want you to know that. Okay.
Appreciate it. I definitely appreciate it.
So spending that time with my family, with those children, seeing 3 generations of children and knowing how I can do better with each generation. Because the first generation, I screwed them up, Dr. Janice. Don't get me started, okay?
You had to learn. They had to teach you so you could raise the second crew.
Oh, my goodness. And they remind me every day. The second thing I do is I exercise. and I exercise every single day. I think that's what keeps me alive. I need it. I need it for the dopamine release. I need it for the excitatory neurotransmitters. I need it for my physical health and my psychological health. And then the third thing I do was I'll condense them into three is David, you talked about you need to leave the country. And so I don't have the luxury of leaving the country because of all my responsibilities and children. But at least I can leave the country in my own mind, right? As Sly Stone said, you can be free at least in your own mind. And so what I do is every weekend, every single weekend in the summertime, I actually sit on the beach, and I have a nice sparkling water, and I listen to jazz.
Okay. So
And
really quickly, Dr. Jeff, are you gonna have any more children?
So I said to my wife, "Why don't we just have another child?" She didn't talk to me for 3 weeks. So then, at the end of the 3 weeks, I said to her, "I guess the answer is no."
Okay, I guess that's a firm no. So Brother Tracy, and as Dr. Jeff said, we think about your family all the time, man. Share with us the three things that you do to kind of take care of yourself.
I think my biggest thing is reaffirming my connection with God. And so that's one of my pet peeves. Getting into a space, getting prayer, and just making sure that my relationship with God is solid and understanding. And then family, spending as much time as I can with my family. We were talking earlier about my youngest child, Tyler. I'm one of those dads that every event that he has at school, I'm there. And he's become just like a bright spot in my heart. Although he doesn't replace Trayvon, he puts so much joy in my life that he helps me heal. And he resembles him so much.
Wow.
And then the third thing is I like to go for drives and just get to myself and put on my playlist and listen to a lot of Frankie Beverly and Mays, a lot of OJs, a lot of the Spinners, the Whispers, and that just that kind of it takes me back to a lot of the music that my mother listened to, that my father listened to. And so those are three things that I usually do to kind of decompress or separate from the work. And I love it, man. When my wife rides out of town with me, I'll put on one song and she'll just say, "Can you stop playing that song and go to the next track?"
What's the song? What's the song, Tracy?
I love that Lenny Williams, man.
Lenny Williams.
Very hard to do.
Yeah,
they don't make music like that no more.
They do not.
They don't.
You talking about the Spinners and Frankie Beverly? Okay.
That's so funny. I've just started listening to Curtis Mayfield, and Now You're Gone, and Born on the Other Side of Town, and those are amazing songs. But I do want to add because Brother Tracy reminds me, of course, religion is important. Dr. Janice, I became an ordained minister. I figured since I'm getting closer to the end, I need every advantage I can get. But, this morning, I figured I'm going to order the Donald Trump Lee Greenwood Bible. I don't know if you all heard about that. With the Constitution affixed to it. That's what he's saying. True story. But I'm not going to get that Bible. I have my own King James version.
Right. So come on in, Lisa. Tell us your three, and then we'll go to Dr. J.
Wow. So definitely exercise for me. So I knew we were going to be doing this morning. So I was up at like 5 and out the house, by a few minutes after 7, so I could get at least 3 miles in. So that's something. Strength training um, over the last year was definitely transformative for me. So it wasn't just the walking part, but the strength training. It's a different kind of release in terms of all of the traumatic energy that I store from all of the stories that I take on. And the reason I started doing that is because I started to notice the reason why I got diligent with it, because I'd always done it, but not consistently. But the reason I got diligent with it is because I started to notice that, after a day of sessions or a day of out in the community doing trauma responses and those kinds of things, like my body literally hurt. I mean, it literally ached. It felt like a weight. I could barely lift my legs up the stairs. And I was just like, no, we cannot do this. So definitely exercising. Um, the other thing, of course, for me, that's really big is faith. My faith is my sanctuary. It's my safe space. It's the place, worship is the place where I'm able to just really expel all of the stuff that I don't even have words for. It's the place of my travail, right? And in that place of travail is a tremendous unburdening for me that then emptying and then being refilled with fresh anointing, fresh insight, and fresh wisdom and strategy and hope. Um, hope that healing is possible for the people that I'm serving, because so much of the loss and trauma that they've endured in the natural sense, you could never conceive how could they ever be whole again. And so I need to go into those settings with hope. And then I think the last thing would probably be is just being with my family. My parents are, older. And I think in this season of being sensitive, especially sensitive and in tune to, Black men and their grief, spending time with my dad in a different kind of way has been really meaningful, and learning about his journey. And there's a story that I've yet to get him to talk about, but I think we're getting there. I want him to share with me what it was like for him when him and my mom were married, and my baby sister died. Um, and so, I took him to the doctors a few months ago, and the doctor said, "Have you ever had a head injury?" And he said, "Yes." And I'm thinking, what's happening? What's happening? And then he said, I was beat in the head by the police, and I had 81 stitches." And he pointed to this. I had never heard that story.
Wow.
So it's in caring for my parents in that way, especially my dad, because especially my dad, it's causing me to be grounded and present in a way that I find very healing and as a form of self-care for myself right now.
Thank you. Dr. J, three things you do to step away from them 70 clients you got.
Good luck with that 3, David. Okay. So I think I've condensed it actually to 2 statements. One is that I go inside myself. So I swim, and I read my Bible every day. I meditate on it. I study it. I'm active. I go to a Bible-based church. But all of that is me going inside myself. And one of the gifts I gave myself through COVID, because I couldn't go swimming during COVID, was to do yoga. And so now I do yoga. I try to do it every day. Some days I'd rather just sleep, but I try to do my yoga every day. And there are forms of yoga that are called trauma yoga to help you. They target the areas of your body that hold trauma in them. But the first thing I do really is go inside myself. And then I realized as I was listening to everybody that I did something early in my career. I minored in African American studies when I went to the University of Maryland. And I had a professor there who said, he's from Africa, and he said, don't let this country define you. And I took that to heart. And David knows, because he's watched this over time, I define myself. So when somebody says, this is how you're going to run your practice, I'm like, okay. And then I define how I'm going to run my practice. So I have a lot of clients on my 70 clients who don't have insurance and don't have the ability to pay, which is why I ain't got no money. But that's not the point, because I know that they're getting therapy that can change their life. And so for me, that's nurturing. Every session that I have with a client is me honoring my mother, who was mentally ill as I was growing up. And when I was 12 years old, she set our house on fire. That was a huge trauma. But I decided to honor her because her psychiatrist that she had back in them days sucked. I didn't want to be a psychiatrist. I define myself. I treat who I choose to treat. So it's hard to get into my schedule because I don't work with just anybody. So I enjoy every client. I end every session with acknowledgments to my mother, because without me walking at her side my whole life, I wouldn't be this outspoken therapist who goes deeper, if I can, on every question. So those are nurturings that I can give to myself every day, every hour, because like Lisa was saying, I have to replenish. I give out a lot. So I have to replenish. And so now I can do it every day. And I define whether I'm doing well or not, because I listen to my clients and they tell me. Somebody made comments on the thing about humor. I use humor. There's no point. Life is ridiculous. So let's just laugh at it. So those are the two things I do. I define myself and I go inside.
And so a couple things, folks. This has been extremely rich. We got about 15 more minutes. Please drop your questions in the chat. I just want to shout out some folks. People always say that there are no programs, or this work doesn't exist. I bear to differ with you. There's some amazing individuals and organizations in communities across the country that are doing some heavy work. We got a bunch of folks in the building. Check out Daryl Green's work at Deep Forgiveness. My good brother Brandon Hay, Black Daddies Club in Toronto. I had a chance to go out to Toronto to spend some time with them, and they're doing some amazing work. You guys definitely check out Fathers Incorporated, doing some serious heavy lifting on a local level in terms of in Metro Atlanta, and then on a national level. Check out Fathers Incorporated. Check out the Monahan Institute for Fatherhood Research and Policy. We've just released a couple of major reports looking at Black fathers, particularly Black fathers in the Metro Atlanta. I'm trying to think who else I need to shout out. There's a couple other good folks in the building, but definitely drop your questions in the chat and we'll be able to address the remaining questions that you have. If you think we need to do a part 2, just drop a 1 in the chat. If we need to do a part 2, just drop a 1 in the chat. I see my good brother Ron Walker from the Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color, again doing some amazing school-based work. So you guys drop your questions in the chat. Drop a 1 in the chat if you would like us to host an additional session. See our good brother Marty McNair from the Jordan McNair Foundation. Brother Marty and his wife, I went to high school with his wife. His son was a Division I college football athlete, and he passed out. He passed out on the field and passed away. So we've seen a number of young men who have passed away involved in sports. So he's written a book about that experience of losing a child who was a student athlete. And so that's another great resource. Brother Marty, put your website in again. And so let's see what questions we have coming in. Again, drop a 1 if we need to do a part 1, a part 2, part 3. Because as our panelists have indicated, training is super important. Men's circles. men's groups are throughout COVID. I was part of a men's group run by Dr. Henry Gregory, who Dr. Janice Stevenson, and I know you know. We were doing qigong in our men's group every other Saturday, and it was something that the men look forward to. And so the men's group approach is critically important. I'm heavily involved in rites of passage as a way of life. And so in the city of Baltimore, we've scaled up our rites of passage work. Again, doing some amazing work. Any other questions?
Don't forget Obari.
Oh, Brother Obari Cotman in Chicago. Obari Cotman doing some amazing work using drumming, which is a technique that we use as well as doing yoga. So y'all, there are folks that are even probably in your local community that you may not necessarily know about. But I think that the work is being done. We have to figure out more ways to collaborate and have these conversations to really kind of strengthen the work across the field, because nobody's coming to save us, y'all. We have to be the ones that our ancestors have prayed for.
Yep.
I really like that comment, and please excuse me, David. I like that comment that Dr. Janice said, and I think our white brothers and sisters and others need to hear that we're not trying to start a revolution. We just want the evolution,
Right.
because we are Latinos, Hispanics are going to be the majority population. Black numbers will increase. The white population will decrease, but they don't need to be afraid. They don't need to be afraid. It's part of the evolution. They're being absorbed into us, and we are all coming together. That is part of the evolution.
Definitely.
Thank you. We're gonna take some of these questions. Dr. Julian in Chicago. I'm gonna put Obari's email address in the chat. Let me just find it. Well, Dr. Stevenson, do you have Obari's email?
Not where I can get to it easily.
All right,
So
and Dr. Julian, shout out to you. I cited your study, one or two of the articles in my dissertation. So I did my dissertation on Black fathers and raising daughters. So shout out to the work that you're doing. And Dr. Julian, I'm gonna put my email address in the chat so you can email me directly, and I will send you Obari's, Dr. Cotman's email address. All right, got a couple questions in the chat. Let's see. Kenny, help me out here if I'm missing any questions.
There's one question on the screen, which is to comment on post-incarceration syndrome.
Okay.
And the need for improved self-efficacy for Black males. Lisa, did you want to go at that first?
So I guess what I would say is, just with the post-incarceration syndrome, is that one of the things that we recently did with some funding from New York Division for Criminal Justice Services is to add some enhanced therapeutic capacity to take care of and address the emotional and mental health needs of formerly incarcerated men. I think the thing that we have to acknowledge in our community is that the people who have been imprisoned for harm have also experienced great harm. And so, being able to provide them resources and services that address the unspoken trauma that they've dealt with and encountered while being incarcerated, plus all of the adjustment issues that come from post-release, is really, really important. And apart from that, if we don't do that, it contributes to the cycles of recidivism and, and other things in the community that, just really bring more harm and trauma and pain. So I'll stop right there with that part of it. And also just with post-traumatic stress disorder, I think from my perspective, and I first heard Dr. John Rich use this term in some of his writing, but is that we have persistent stress. It's persistent. We don't got no post, had nothing. It's all ongoing. So there's never a post for the men that we serve. And I think that that's something to keep in mind because they're always in that current and ongoing state of either disassociation, hypervigilance, hyperarousal, avoidance, all of those things as a part of their lived reality. So I'll just say, leave it at that for now.
Yeah. I want to add to that. I'm currently working with a gentleman who's been in prison since he was 24 years old. He's now 65 years old. And we have managed to, through evaluations and testimony, move him from death row to life without parole. And then from life without parole to life with parole. And now his case is being considered for release. And I think it's very important to note that the available resources into which he can be released are all white. Just want to put that out there. Let y'all know there's a whole area that is untouched by any kind of activism. The Innocence Project is something that we have drawn on frequently, but that's targeted to people who were proven innocent. So there are resources. Okay. There are resources that are available for people that are federally and locally funded for people who are released at the end of their incarceration. But mostly our brothers and sisters are just let loose in the world. And they have to find their own outlets. They have to find their own recovery places. I do get referrals for people who say, I've been out 3 years now and I'm about to lose it. I saw your face on television. I like what you had to say. Can you help me? And I will take those cases every time because they have nowhere to turn. And they're not always welcomed in church because they're judged because of the stigma. So the post-incarceration syndrome is not just a personal event. It's a community and a society event. And as long as Black men are Black and men, they carry the burden of that. And as long as the Black women are strong and vocal, we are just as vulnerable as they are. Somebody told me early in my career that people don't get mad at me because of my light skin. Whatever, there's some more words in that sentence, because I can take advantage of it and use it to speak boldly. Because somebody has to say, we are human beings. And my job as a human being is to help other human beings in need. And, you know, there's many a day when I'm alone. So I welcome the company.
So let's do this, y'all. Extremely rich, wow, dialogue. I think the last question is critically important. I know it's critically important for me because for over a decade, I dealt with this issue of, you know, survivor's guilt. You know, some guys tried to rob me and one of my friends. He was shot and killed. I was at Morgan. He was at Morehouse. I lived. He died. And for over a decade, you know, I blame myself for living. And so let's start with Dr. Jeff, and we're just gonna go around super quickly. We got some final comments, y'all. Don't go anywhere. How do you deal with survivor's guilt, Dr. Jeff?
Well, given the amount of time we have left, I'll keep it very simple. Understand that the survivor's guilt is your spirit telling you that you were extremely lucky that it was not you, and therefore you were kept alive for a reason. And that reason being that survivor guilt, perhaps guilting you into making more of a success and meaning in your life to helping others. And whomever that person was who may have died in vain or for all the wrong reasons, whatever the case may be, that you continue their spirit by making a difference in the world. That survivor guilt is a reminder that you have to do more.
Lisa, what are your thoughts?
Survivors, I love how you said survivors, turning survivors guilt on its head to make meaning. Survivors guilt, it can contribute to a lot of self-destructive responses to the trauma of a loss like that. I think one is acknowledging it and putting it out there in the open and talking it through, because so that we can start to see the distortions. Where are the distortions at? And then kind of really combating some of those irrational distortions and bringing it back to the reality over and over again, and doing that, making space for the emotional discomfort that will come with sitting in the fact that you are the one who lived. And hopefully, as you unpack and unravel some of those distortions, we can get to a place of mindfulness, and in that place, deep gratitude, because you are the one that lived. And now we move into the question of, since I'm here.
Brother Tracy, we're gonna end with you. What are your thoughts about survivor's guilt?
I think survivor's guilt for me is, feeling guilty over something that you didn't do. And while, some form of guilt can result from, our thoughts or our actions, I think there's also forms of why we did what we should have done, how we could have prevented it. In my case, I think that from the tragic events involving the death of Trayvon, that I didn't realize that this was out of my control. And so the number one thing for me was just to seek some professional help and getting me to really understand that this was something that I couldn't control. This was something that was an unfortunate loss for me, but seeking professional help, man, that was how I kind of combated the survivor's guilt.
I'm going to add real quick. That's why Daryl Green's program, Deep Forgiveness, exists, because there is deep forgiveness to do when you have to forgive yourself.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, I know Dr. Jeff has to run to another appointment. Dr. Jeff, want to always thank you for heeding the call whenever we need your expertise. From looking at all of the ones that was in the chat, we definitely got to do another part 2 or part 3. So I want to thank Dr. Jeff Gardier. Want to thank Dr. Janice Stevenson, who is like a second mother to me. Brother Tracy Martin, always keeping your family in prayer and always honoring the life and legacy of Trayvon Martin. Dr. Lisa Good, thanks for your deep in work and specialization around grief and loss. Been a powerful panel. Want to thank Fathers Incorporated. Again, you guys, can somebody just drop Fathers Incorporated's website in the chat, doing really deep end direct services with work with men in Atlanta. I was just in Atlanta with Kenny a couple of weeks ago. They're serving about 800 fathers in the metro Atlanta area in terms of local work. And then on a national level, Kenny manages the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse. So go to fatherhood.gov for research briefs, articles, webinars. Again, y'all, there's just some amazing work, being done across the country. And then shout out to my colleagues at the Moynihan Institute for Research and Policy. Please download our newest report, which looks at reflections, motivations, trends among low-income fathers in the NPVU community in Atlanta. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's some serious work being done. Let's figure out ways to love on each other more. Let's figure out ways to collaborate, because no one is coming to save us. I want to thank my mentor, Dr. Doreen Lowry, Arcadia University in Philadelphia, and just all of the folks who've attended. You guys have a super powerful day, and continue to inspire and breathe life into our community. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
And panelists, stay on. Just stay on for a few minutes.